Sunlight, filtered through the sheer curtains, painted the Shen family living room in a muted gold. Dust motes danced in the beams, a silent ballet against the backdrop of opulent furnishings. Changqing sat perched on the edge of a plush sofa, the silk upholstery cool against her skin. She watched the dust motes, their aimless drift a stark contrast to the tightly coiled tension in her gut. Her father, Pan Weisan, paced before the fireplace, a nervous energy radiating from him. Each creak of the polished wood floor seemed to amplify the silence, a silence pregnant with unspoken words and veiled intentions. Changqing's hand unconsciously went to the jade pendant at her throat, a familiar, comforting weight against the hollow ache in her chest. She didn't remember where it came from, just as she didn't remember the first 18 years of her life. Amnesia, the doctors had called it. A blank canvas where her past should have been. A blank canvas that others were now eager to paint with their own narratives. The doorbell chimed, a shrill intrusion into the strained quiet. Weisan stopped pacing, a flicker of anticipation in his eyes. "They're here," he announced, a touch too brightly. Changqing's grip tightened on the jade pendant. "They." The word hung in the air, thick with unspoken meaning. Ding Yakin and her daughter. The woman who had seamlessly inserted herself into their lives after her mother's death, and the daughter who Changqing's thoughts trailed off. She hadn't met the daughter yet, but a sense of foreboding, as heavy as the humid air before a storm, had settled over her since Weisan had first mentioned her. The living room door opened, and Weisan ushered them in. Ding Yakin, draped in a silk dress that shimmered like a venomous snake, offered a practiced smile. Beside her stood a young woman, a mirror image of her mother, but with a veneer of youthful innocence that Changqing instinctively distrusted. "Changqing, this is Auntie's daughter Ding Jiahui," Weisan said, his voice strained with forced joviality. "Jiahui will be staying with us for a while, acting as your tutor. I hope you get along well with each other. Like sisters." The words grated on Changqing's nerves. Sisters. The very idea felt like a betrayal of her lost memories, of the sister she might have had, the sister she couldn't remember. Jiahui stepped forward, her hand outstretched. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Changqing." Her voice was sweet, cloying, like overripe fruit. Changqing's gaze swept over her, taking in the perfectly manicured nails, the designer handbag, the subtle but expensive jewelry. Every detail screamed of calculated perfection, a performance meant to charm and disarm. Changqing remained seated, her hand still clasped around her pendant. She inhaled slowly, and a wave of nausea washed over her. Jiahui's perfume, a heavy floral scent, filled the air, suffocating her. It was the same perfume her mother used to wear. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't just the perfume. There was something else, an unsettling familiarity in Jiahui's mannerisms, the tilt of her head, the way she smiled. It was a faint echo, a distorted reflection of someone she couldn't quite place. "Is something wrong, Changqing?" Yakin asked, her voice laced with feigned concern. Changqing looked at her, the woman's flawless facade cracking under the intensity of her gaze. "The perfume," Changqing said, her voice low and tight. "It's overpowering." Jiahui's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, a flicker of something cold and sharp in her eyes before it was quickly masked. "Oh, I'm so sorry," she murmured, withdrawing her hand. "I didn't realize it was too strong." "It's not the perfume," Changqing thought, her mind racing. "It's you. It's everything about you." But what? What was it about Jiahui that triggered such a visceral reaction? Was it simply the blatant attempt at ingratiating herself, or was there something deeper, something lurking beneath the surface? Weisan cleared his throat, breaking the tense silence. "Changqing, Jiahui is here to help you. You should be more welcoming." His words, meant to be a gentle reprimand, sounded more like a plea. Changqing looked at her father, the lines of worry etched deep into his face. He seemed smaller, weaker than she remembered, or perhaps imagined. Had he always been so easily swayed? So easily manipulated by Yakin's charm? Help me? Chongqing echoed, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. Or help yourselves. The words hung in the air, a challenge thrown down. Yakin's smile tightened, her eyes glinting with barely concealed anger. Jiehui, however, maintained her composure, her expression carefully neutral. Chongqing studied her, searching for a crack in the perfect mask. There was something unsettling about her calmness, a stillness that belied the tension in the room. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Each tick seemed to amplify the unspoken accusations, the simmering resentment, the web of secrets that entangled them all. Chongqing's mind raced, piecing together fragments of memories, whispers of conversations overheard, a sense of unease that had been growing since her mother's death. Was Jiehui's presence here a coincidence? Or was it part of a larger plan, a scheme orchestrated by Yakin to solidify her control over the Shen family fortune? I don't need a tutor, Chongqing said finally, her voice firm. I need answers. She stood up, her gaze fixed on Jiehui. Answers about my mother. Answers about my past. The jade pendant swung against her chest, a silent reminder of the life she couldn't remember, the life that had been stolen from her. The air crackled with unspoken threats, the battle lines drawn. The game had begun. The lukewarm water cascaded over Ding Jiehui's hands, a stark contrast to the simmering unease churning in her stomach. The opulent Shen family bathroom, with its marble countertops and gleaming gold fixtures, felt more like a gilded cage. Her mother's instructions echoed in her ears, be patient, Jiehui. Gain her trust. Easy for her to say. Chongqing's gaze, sharp and unwavering, felt like a physical brand. Jiehui dried her hands meticulously, a small, nervous habit she'd picked up as a child. She could feel the weight of her mother's expectations, a heavy cloak draped over her shoulders. This charade of tutoring, of gentle companionship, felt increasingly precarious. One wrong move, one slip of the mask, and everything could crumble. Emerging from the bathroom, Jiehui found Chongqing perched on the edge of her bed, flipping through a photo album. The silence in the room crackled with an unspoken tension. Jiehui hesitated, unsure how to approach her. The girl's aloofness was a formidable barrier. Those are pictures from my childhood, Chongqing said, her voice flat, devoid of any warmth. Jiehui's carefully crafted smile faltered. They look happy. Chongqing's gaze drifted to a photo of a woman with a kind smile and warm eyes. My mother, she said, the word laced with a bitterness that surprised Jiehui. She died when I was young. A sudden wave of pity washed over Jiehui, momentarily eclipsing her calculated intentions. Was it genuine, this flicker of empathy? Or was it another performance, another layer of the intricate game they were playing? The sound of approaching footsteps broke the fragile truce. Ding Yakin swept into the room, her presence filling the space like a fragrant, overpowering perfume. Chongqing, darling, are you feeling better? She asked, her voice dripping with honeyed concern. Chongqing's expression hardened. Jiehui watched, a silent observer, as the two women engaged in a subtle, yet ferocious power play. Yakin's every gesture, every word, was carefully calibrated, a performance designed to project an image of maternal care. But Chongqing's eyes, dark and unyielding, saw through the facade. Jiehui felt a shiver crawl down her spine. This wasn't just a game, it was a war, and she was caught in the crossfire. Later that afternoon, in the cavernous dining room, the tension became palpable. The clinking of silverware against porcelain seemed to amplify the silence. Weisun attempted to bridge the widening chasm between his daughter and his lover. Chongqing, he began, his voice laced with a weariness Jiehui hadn't noticed before. Jiehui is here to help you. You need to be more receptive. Changqing's gaze snapped to her father, her eyes blazing with an intensity that made Jiehui shrink back in her chair. Help me, she repeated, the words dripping with sarcasm. Or help yourself. A flicker of confusion crossed Wei Sun's face. He glanced at Yakin, who offered him a reassuring smile. Jiehui saw the subtle exchange, the silent communication that excluded Changqing. The realization struck her with the force of a physical blow. She wasn't just a pawn in her mother's game, she was a tool, wielded to manipulate and control. The thought left a bitter taste in her mouth. You treat me like a child, like a fool, Changqing continued, her voice rising, but I remember. I remember everything. A lie, Jiehui knew. The doctor's reports, the hushed conversations she'd overheard, confirmed Changqing's amnesia. But what was the purpose of this deception? Jiehui's mind raced, trying to decipher the hidden layers of meaning. Was it a desperate attempt to regain control? Or was it something more sinister, a carefully constructed trap? The color drained from Yakin's face, leaving her looking strangely vulnerable. Changqing, what are you talking about? She stammered. Changqing rose from her chair, her movements slow and deliberate, as if she were approaching a prey. She fixed her gaze on Yakin, her eyes burning with a cold fire. You want to occupy the magpie nest, she said, her voice low and dangerous. Ask me if I agree or not. The silence that followed was deafening. Jiehui felt her heart pounding against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the suffocating tension. I am no longer the fool who you can coax, play with and deceive before, Changqing hissed. Wei Sun pushed back his chair, a look of alarm etched on his face. Changqing. That's enough, he barked. But Changqing ignored him. She advanced on Yakin, her every movement radiating an aura of menace. You think you can steal what's mine? She whispered, her voice barely audible. Yakin recoiled, her carefully constructed composure crumbling. A flicker of fear, raw and unadulterated, flashed across her face. Jiehui watched, mesmerized, as the carefully constructed facade shattered, revealing the fragile woman beneath. The air crackled with unspoken accusations, with the weight of secrets and lies. Jiehui felt trapped, a butterfly pinned beneath the scrutinizing gaze of a collector. The carefully constructed narrative she had woven, the image of innocence she had projected, felt thin and brittle, threatening to break at any moment. She glanced at her mother, seeking guidance, reassurance, anything to anchor her in this swirling vortex of deception. But Yakin's eyes were fixed on Changqing, a mixture of fear and resentment churning within their depths. Jiehui realized, with a chilling certainty, that she was alone in this game, a pawn sacrificed on the altar of her mother's ambition. The weight of the realization settled upon her, a heavy burden she wasn't sure she could bear. The dinner ended abruptly, the remnants of the meal left untouched on the table, a silent testament to the bitter conflict that had erupted. As Jiehui followed her mother out of the dining room, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had witnessed a turning point, a shift in the delicate balance of power. The secrets that clung to the Shen family, like cobwebs in a darkened mansion, were beginning to unravel, and she was caught in the tangled threads, unsure which way to turn. The night stretched before her, long and uncertain, filled with the promise of further confrontations and the chilling realization that she was playing a game she didn't fully understand, with stakes higher than she could have imagined. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind Pan Wei Sun, the sound echoing through the opulent, yet strangely hollow, Shen family home. A brittle silence descended, broken only by the rhythmic tick-tock of the grandfather clock in the hall. Ding Yakin watched him go, her carefully composed smile slowly fading as the sound of his car pulling away reached her. Her perfectly manicured fingers tightened around the delicate porcelain teacup, the fine china a stark contrast to the steely glint in her eyes. He was becoming more difficult to manage, his affections wavering like a flickering candle flame. He was a man easily swayed by sentiment, a weakness she intended to exploit fully. "He's worried about her," Ding Jiahui observed softly, her voice a gentle counterpoint to her mother's unspoken tension. Jiahui smoothed an invisible crease from her pristine skirt, her gaze fixed on the swirling tea leaves in her own cup. Beneath the facade of demure obedience, a flicker of something colder, more calculating, resided. She mirrored her mother's ambition, a reflection polished by years of careful observation. Yakin's lips curled into a thin, humorless smile. "Let him worry. Worry weakens resolve." She took a slow sip of tea, the delicate floral scent doing little to soothe the burning impatience within her. Chongqing is a child playing at defiance. She thinks her little tantrums will change anything. A memory, sharp and unwelcome, of Chongqing's icy stare from earlier that day pricked at her. The girl possessed an unsettling resilience, a strength that belied her fragile appearance and amnesiac state. It was a strength Yakin was determined to break. "But mother," Jiahui hesitated, her brow furrowing slightly. "She's different. She seems to suspect what?" Yakin's voice was edged with steel. "That we are not the benevolent caretakers we pretend to be. Let her suspect. Suspicion without proof is a toothless dog." "But Mrs. Rong," Jiahui trailed off, her eyes darting nervously towards the doorway. The old housekeeper's unwavering loyalty to Chongqing was a thorn in their side, a constant, watchful presence. Yakin's eyes narrowed, her gaze turning glacial. "Mrs. Rong is a relic of the past. A sentimental fool clinging to a dead woman's memory." The dismissal of the housekeeper had been swift and brutal, Wei-san surprisingly compliant. Yakin had planted the seeds of doubt expertly, whispering of imagined slights, fabricated incompetence. The old woman's tearful protest still rang faintly in her ears, a discordant note in her carefully orchestrated symphony of control. It had been a necessary move. Mrs. Rome knew too much, saw too much. "For the sake of our better lives," Jiahui, Yakin continued, her voice softening slightly as she turned back to her daughter, "you must know how to endure. To tolerate these inconveniences." She placed a hand on Jiahui's, her touch both reassuring and chillingly firm. "We are so close. Imagine, Jiahui, the life we can have. The power, the respect." Her eyes glazed over momentarily, lost in a vision of glittering social events, envious whispers, and the unchallenged authority she craved. Jiahui's gaze flickered with a similar avarice, a shared ambition that bound them tighter than blood. She understood the sacrifices, the subtle manipulations, the carefully constructed web of lies they had woven. She had seen the way her mother had expertly maneuvered herself into Wei-san's life, filling the void left by his deceased wife with calculated tenderness and manufactured grief. Jiahui herself had played her part, feigning innocent concern for Chongqing, offering a comforting presence while subtly probing for weaknesses, gathering information to feed her mother's machinations. Only after getting married, Yakin's voice broke through Jiahui's thoughts, each word clipped and precise, "Can we truly secure our future? Only then can we rid ourselves of the current predicament." The unspoken threat hung heavy in the air, a chilling reminder of the stakes involved. Chongqing, with her fragmented memories and growing suspicion, was an obstacle, a loose thread that threatened to unravel their meticulously crafted plan. Yakin stood, her movements fluid and graceful, the embodiment of composure. "We must be patient, Jiahui. Like a spider waiting for its prey. We must be resourceful." She walked towards the window, gazing out at the sprawling gardens, the meticulously manicured lawns a testament to the Shen family's wealth. A wealth she intended to claim as her own. Jiahui watched her mother, a mixture of admiration and unease swirling within her. She understood the unspoken message, the veiled threat aimed at Chongqing. A chill snaked down her spine, a premonition of the darkness that lay ahead. The Shen family home, with its opulent facade, felt less like a sanctuary and more like a gilded cage, its inhabitants trapped in a web of secrets and lies. The air was thick with unspoken anxieties, with the ghosts of past decisions and the shadows of future conflicts. Jiehui knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that the battle for the Shen family fortune had only just begun. And in this battle, there would be no room for sentiment, no space for mercy. Only the ruthless pursuit of power would determine the victor. Sunlight, filtered through the sheer curtains, painted the Shen family living room in a soft, hazy glow. Han Weisan sat perched on the edge of a plush sofa, a half-empty cup of tea cooling on the table before him. His gaze drifted towards the meticulously manicured garden visible through the large bay windows, his brow furrowed in thought. The scent of jasmine, usually a source of calm, did little to soothe the unease churning within him. He heard the soft click of the door and looked up as Oh Haiyang entered, his usual amiable smile in place. "Weisan, you seem troubled." Haiyang settled into the armchair opposite him, his eyes, sharp and observant, taking in Weisan's demeanor. Weisan sighed, the lines around his eyes deepening. "It's Chongqing," he admitted, his voice laced with weariness. "This amnesia, it's changing her." He thought of the vibrant, assured daughter he knew, now replaced by a shadow, haunted by suspicion and distrust. "She's become different." Haiyang nodded slowly, a thoughtful expression settling on his face. "Indeed. This experience has undoubtedly taken its toll. It's only natural for her to be wary, given the circumstances." His words were carefully chosen, a subtle seed of doubt planted amidst apparent sympathy. "He's too quick to accept this change," Haiyang mused inwardly. "Almost as if he expects it." "Wary? She treats Yakin and Jiehui with open hostility," Weisan countered, a flicker of irritation in his voice. He picked up his teacup, the porcelain cool against his palm. "Perhaps Haiyang is right," he considered, taking a slow sip. "Perhaps it is just the trauma. Perhaps she senses something we don't," Haiyang suggested softly, his gaze fixed on Weisan. He watched for a reaction, any flicker of doubt that might betray Weisan's growing trust in Yakin. He knew the woman's ambition, he'd seen the subtle manipulations, the calculated moves to secure her place within the Shen family. Weisan's hand tightened around the teacup. "Sense something?" The thought echoed in his mind. He looked at Haiyang, searching his face for any hint of insincerity. "What do you mean?" Haiyang leaned back in his chair, a casual gesture that belied the sharpness of his observation. "Chongqing is intelligent, Weisan. Even with her memory gone, her instincts might still be sharp. Perhaps her hostility is a form of self-preservation. Do you still suspect that she is pretending?" Weisan asked, the question hanging heavy in the air. He ran a hand through his hair, fatigue etched onto his features. "Surely, she wouldn't feign such a thing." Haiyang met his gaze directly, his expression unreadable. "I merely suggest we consider all possibilities. Chongqing is just a bit stubborn. But her heart is not bad." He paused, letting the words sink in. He still trusts her too much. He had to be careful, pushing too hard would only raise Weisan's suspicions. Later that day, the shadows stretched long across the polished floors of the Shen mansion. Chongqing stood in a hallway outside Aunt Sue's room, her hand hovering over the intricately carved wooden door. A faint aroma of sandalwood drifted from within, a familiar scent that offered a fleeting sense of comfort. She took a deep breath, steeling herself. "I need her help." A soft knock, and the door swung open, revealing Aunt Sue's kind face, framed by wisps of silver hair. "Chongqing, dear. Come in." Chongqing stepped inside, the room bathed in the warm glow of a table lamp. Aunt Sue gestured towards a chair, her eyes filled with concern. "What is it, child? You seem troubled." Changqing hesitated, her fingers tracing the intricate patterns on the silk cushion. "It's Mrs. Li," she began, her voice low. "Yakin is trying to replace her." Mrs. Li, the family cook for years, was more than just an employee, she was a trusted confidant, a link to a past Changqing couldn't quite grasp. "I can't let Yakin take that away from me." Aunt Sue's expression hardened. "That woman, she moves too quickly." She reached out, her hand warm and reassuring on Changqing's. "Don't worry, child. We'll find a way." Changqing looked at Aunt Sue, a flicker of hope igniting within her. Perhaps, with the help of those still loyal to her, she could navigate the treacherous currents swirling around her, reclaim her life, and uncover the truth buried beneath the fog of her lost memory. The task seemed daunting, but the fear that had been a constant companion began to recede, replaced by a nascent determination. "I won't let them win." The fight for her family, for her memories, had just begun. The air, heavy with unspoken truths and simmering resentments, crackled with the promise of a storm. The crisp morning light, filtered through the sheer curtains, cast long shadows across the polished wooden floor of Shen Changqing's bedroom. She sat at her antique desk, a book open before her, but her gaze was unfocused, lost in the swirling mist of her fragmented memories. The scent of jasmine tea, usually a comfort, today seemed to mock her, a reminder of a life she couldn't fully grasp. Ding Jiahui, perched on a velvet chaise lounge, ostensibly reviewing notes, watched her with a veiled intensity that Changqing felt like a physical touch. This forced proximity, this constant observation, it chafed against her raw nerves. "Why does she always seem to be watching me?" The thought echoed in the silent chambers of her mind. "Changqing," Jiahui began, her voice honey-sweet, "are you having trouble with the material? I can explain it again if you'd like." The offer, so seemingly innocent, grated on Changqing. It felt less like help, more like a subtle assertion of control. "I prefer to study at my own pace," she responded, her voice cool and measured, each word carefully chosen. "She wants to see me struggle. To prove I'm incompetent." The suspicion, a venomous serpent, coiled in her gut. The hours stretched, each tick of the grandfather clock in the hall amplifying the tension in the room. The veneer of civility began to crack. Jiahui's questions became more pointed, her corrections more frequent, tinged with an almost condescending tone. Changqing's replies grew sharper, her patience thinning with each passing moment. A silent battle waged between them, fought with veiled words and strained smiles. A sudden chill ran down Changqing's spine. Something was missing. The jade pendant, a gift from her mother, usually nestled safely in its velvet box on her desk, was gone. A wave of panic washed over her, not just for the loss of the pendant, but for the violation, the intrusion into her most private space. Her eyes, sharp and accusatory, locked onto Jiahui. Who else could it be? Where is it? Changqing's voice, though low, vibrated with suppressed fury. Jiahui feigned innocence, her eyes wide and questioning. Where is what, Changqing? Don't play coy, Changqing snapped, rising from her chair, the room suddenly feeling too small, too suffocating. My jade pendant. It was here moments ago. You were the only one in the room. Jiahui's expression shifted, the mask of innocence slipping to reveal a flicker of something darker, something calculating. I haven't touched your pendant, she retorted, a touch of defiance entering her voice. Perhaps you've simply misplaced it. Misplaced it? Changqing's laughter was brittle, devoid of humor. She ran into my room to steal things, she called out, her voice rising, a primal scream against the injustice, the insidiousness of the situation. The accusation hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. The commotion drew the attention of Pan Weisan, who strode into the room, his face creased with concern. He looked from Changqing, her face flushed with anger, to Jiahui, who had adopted a wounded, almost fragile demeanor. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice laced with authority. "She accused me of stealing." Jia cried, her voice trembling, a perfect picture of injured innocence. "I didn't steal things. You falsely accused me." Her eyes, glistening with unshed tears, met Weisen's, a silent plea for understanding, for protection. "She's good." The thought flashed through Changqing's mind, a grudging acknowledgement of Jia skill at manipulation. Changqing, struggling to control her rage, pointed to the empty velvet box. "My jade pendant is gone. She was the only one here." Her voice, though strained, carried the weight of conviction. Weisen's gaze shifted to the empty box, a flicker of unease crossing his features. He hesitated, caught between the two women, two conflicting narratives. Changqing saw the doubt in his eyes, the subtle sway towards Jia manufactured vulnerability. A cold wave of despair washed over her. "He doesn't believe me." The realization was a sharp, stinging blow. Even her own father, it seemed, was under Jia spell. "Changqing," Weisen began, his voice laced with a placating tone, "perhaps you're mistaken." "Jia wouldn't she?" Changqing interrupted, her voice raw with pain and frustration. "She's been watching me, studying me, waiting for an opportunity. Don't you see? She's trying to control me, to manipulate me, just like her mother." The words tumbled out, fueled by a mixture of anger and desperation. The accusation hung in the air, a stark contrast to the opulent surroundings, to the facade of familial harmony that Ding Yakin had so carefully constructed. Weisen's face hardened, a flicker of annoyance crossing his features. "That's enough, Changqing," he said, his voice firm, brooking no argument. "Jia is your tutor, here to help you. You need to be more respectful." The rebuke, the implicit dismissal of her concerns, sent a fresh wave of anger coursing through Changqing's veins. She wanted to scream, to rage against the injustice of it all, but something held her back, a flicker of caution, a sense that she was playing a game she didn't fully understand. "There's more to this than meets the eye." The thought, a chilling whisper, echoed in her mind. She turned abruptly, fleeing the suffocating atmosphere of the room, the image of Jia triumphant smirk burning itself into her memory. As she ran, the jade pendant, tucked safely in the pocket of her jeans, pressed against her skin, a small, cold comfort in the face of the storm brewing around her. She knew, with a certainty that transcended her amnesia, that this was just the beginning. The afternoon stretched into evening, the silence in the Shen mansion broken only by the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock. Changqing remained secluded in her room, the events of the day replaying in her mind. She felt a profound sense of isolation, a loneliness that cut deeper than any physical pain. Who can I trust? The question haunted her, a constant refrain in the silent symphony of her thoughts. Mrs. Rong, the housekeeper, brought her a tray of food, her kind eyes filled with concern. Changqing forced a smile, grateful for the small gesture of kindness in the midst of the swirling chaos. She knew, instinctively, that Mrs. Rong was an ally, a beacon of hope in the darkness that threatened to engulf her. As she ate, her mind raced, piecing together the fragments of her memories, searching for clues, for answers. She knew, with a growing certainty, that the theft of the pendant, the accusations, the manipulations, were all part of a larger game, a game with stakes far higher than she could yet comprehend. And she was determined, despite her amnesia, despite the fear that gnawed at her, to uncover the truth, to protect her family, and to reclaim her stolen life. Sunlight, sharp and intrusive, sliced through the sheer curtains of the Shen family dining room. It glinted off the crystal glassware, the polished mahogany table, and the tense faces gathered around it. Shen Changqing picked at a piece of untouched toast, the dry texture mirroring the arid landscape of her memory. The scent of jasmine tea, usually a comfort, today felt cloying, suffocating. She could feel the weight of Ding Yakin's gaze, heavy and expectant, like a spider poised over its prey. Chongqing, you haven't touched your food, Pan Weisen's voice, tinged with a note of forced joviality, grated on her nerves. He reached out, a paternal gesture that felt alien, unsettling. Chongqing flinched involuntarily. Does he think a touch can erase everything? She thought bitterly. Does he think a touch can make me forget? I'm not hungry, she replied, her voice flat, devoid of any filial warmth. The events of the past few weeks, the whispers of the servants, the blatant maneuvering of Ding Yakin and her daughter, it all coalesced into a knot of resentment in her chest. Ding Jiahui, perched delicately beside her mother, offered a saccharine smile. Perhaps some of the congee would be easier on your stomach, Chongqing. Mrs. Rong made it especially for you. Chongqing's eyes locked with Jiahui's. Beneath the veneer of concern, she detected a flicker of something else, something cold and calculating. Like a cat playing with a wounded bird, Chongqing thought, her hand instinctively going to the small, jade pendant she wore, a single, tangible link to a past she couldn't grasp. I appreciate the gesture, Jiahui, Chongqing responded, her tone laced with an icy politeness, but as I said, I'm not hungry. The atmosphere in the room thickened, the air heavy with unspoken accusations. Pan Weisen cleared his throat, the sound echoing uncomfortably in the strained silence. Chongqing, your behavior towards Jiahui has been unacceptable. She's here to help you, to tutor you. You need to show her some respect. Chongqing's gaze snapped to her father, a mixture of disbelief and hurt welling within her. Respect, she echoed, the word catching in her throat. She gestured towards Yakin and Jiahui, her voice trembling with barely suppressed rage, they treated my mother like, the words failed her, dissolving into a choked sob. Ding Yakin seized the opportunity, her voice dripping with feigned concern. Weisen, you see. This is what I've been telling you. Chongqing's condition, it's making her volatile, delusional. She needs professional help. Delusional? The word struck Chongqing like a physical blow. The fragments of memories, hazy and disjointed, flashed through her mind, her mother's frail hand, the hushed conversations, the chilling gleam in Ding Yakin's eyes. They want to silence me, she thought, a chilling realization dawning. They want to make me believe I'm crazy. Chongqing, Pan Weisen's voice, sharper now, cut through her thoughts. Apologize to Jiahui. Quickly. The demand, so unreasonable, so unjust, shattered the last vestiges of her composure. Apologize, she repeated, her voice rising, laced with disbelief. Dad, do you even know? Do you know how they treated my mother? Do you know what they did? Pan Weisen's face hardened, his eyes narrowing. That's enough, Chongqing. Your mother's gone. You need to move on. And Jiahui and Yakin are here to stay. In fact, he paused, his gaze softening as he turned to Yakin, a sickeningly sweet smile spreading across his face, we're getting married. The announcement hung in the air, a heavy, suffocating weight. Chongqing stared at her father, a chasm of incomprehension opening between them. The faint scent of jasmine, once a comforting reminder of her mother, now reeked of betrayal. The sunlight streaming through the window suddenly felt cold, invasive, exposing the raw, festering wound of her loss and the chilling reality of her isolation. He's chosen them, she thought, a wave of nausea washing over her. He's chosen them over me, over the memory of my mother. The world around her seemed to tilt, the familiar dining room morphing into a distorted, nightmarish landscape. She wanted to scream, to rage, to tear at the suffocating web of deceit that was closing in around her. But something held her back, a flicker of icy resolve in the depths of her despair. They won't win, she vowed silently, clutching the jade pendant, its smooth coolness a small anchor in the swirling chaos. I won't let them erase my past. I won't let them steal my future. She pushed back her chair, the scraping sound jarring in the sudden silence. "Congratulations," she said, her voice a hollow whisper, devoid of any emotion. Then, without another word, she turned and walked away, leaving the suffocating sweetness of jasmine and the bitter taste of betrayal behind her. The portrait of her mother, hanging in the hallway, seemed to follow her with a sorrowful gaze. And in that moment, Changqing knew she was utterly alone in her fight. But she would fight. For her mother. For herself. For the truth. The antique clock in the hall chimed, a brittle, metallic sound that echoed through the Shen family home. Changqing watched the pendulum swing, a hypnotic rhythm that did little to soothe the unease churning in her stomach. Ding Yakin's laughter, light and melodious, drifted from the dining room, each note a carefully placed piece in the elaborate performance she'd been staging since her arrival. Changqing pressed her fingers against the cool glass of the windowpane, the city lights blurring into an indistinct tapestry below. A gilded cage, she thought, beautiful and suffocating all at once. Oh Haiyang's words from earlier that day echoed in her mind, "Isn't Ding Jiehui Pan Weisen's biological daughter? Then we'll run a DNA test." The idea had ignited a flicker of hope within her, a chance to expose Yakin's machinations, to peel back the layers of deceit that shrouded the Shen family like a suffocating fog. But the task was fraught with risk. Yakin was a viper, quick to strike at any perceived threat. Changqing needed to be careful, precise. Her reflection stared back, a stranger in familiar surroundings. The amnesia had robbed her not just of memories, but of a sense of self. Who was she before? What secrets lay buried beneath the surface of her fractured mind? She closed her eyes, willing the fragments to coalesce, but only a dull ache responded. Later that evening, as the house settled into a deceptive quiet, Changqing slipped into her father's study. The rich scent of leather and old paper hung heavy in the air, a comforting familiarity in this house of shifting alliances. She found what she needed tucked away in a locked drawer, a hairbrush her father used. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This is it, she thought, the first real step. She carefully extracted a few strands, placing them in a small plastic bag. The next target was Jiehui. This proved more challenging. Jiehui was always hovering, a shadow attached to Yakin's side. But Changqing noticed a pattern. Every afternoon, Jiehui would retreat to the garden for a clandestine phone call. Changqing, feigning an interest in horticulture, managed to position herself close enough to overhear snippets of the conversation. Miss you soon," Jiehui's voice, normally so carefully modulated, held a tremor of genuine emotion. Changqing thought, another piece of the puzzle. A few days later, under the pretense of needing help with her studies, Changqing managed to collect a few strands of Jiehui's hair from her brush. The act felt strangely illicit, a small victory in the larger war she was waging. She sent the samples to a discreet lab Oh Haiyang had recommended, the anticipation gnawing at her. The truth, whatever it may be, was within reach. One evening, observing Jiehui's routine, Changqing followed her to the garden. Hidden behind a trellis of climbing roses, she saw Jiehui meet a young man. He was tall and lean, with a gentle smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. This must be Zhao Yi. Changqing watched as they embraced, a knot of unease tightening in her chest. There was something about Zhao Yi, a vulnerability that made her wary. "You shouldn't be here, Yi. It's too dangerous," Jiehui whispered, her voice laced with anxiety. "I had to see you," Zhao Yi replied, his gaze fixed on Jiehui with an intensity that bordered on desperation. Changqing felt a pang of sympathy for him, a premonition of impending heartbreak. Jiehui, she was certain, was playing a game far more complex than Zhao Yi could comprehend. The next day, Changqing engineered a chance encounter with Zhao Yi at a local cafe. She approached him cautiously, her heart pounding. "Mr. Zhao, I believe." He looked up, startled. Yes. Do I know you? My name is Shin Chongqing. I need to talk to you about Ding Jiehui. Her voice was low, urgent. Zhao Yi's expression shifted, a flicker of suspicion crossing his features. What about Jiehui? Chongqing hesitated, weighing her words carefully. She couldn't reveal too much, not yet. Just be careful, Mr. Zhao. Things aren't always what they seem. He studied her, his eyes narrowed. What are you trying to say? Jiehui, she isn't who you think she is, Chongqing said, her voice barely a whisper. She's using you. A dismissive laugh escaped his lips. That's absurd. Jiehui would never, please, Mr. Zhao. Just be careful. Chongqing turned and walked away, the weight of his disbelief heavy on her shoulders. He wouldn't listen, she thought, blinded by love, just another pawn in their game. Back at the Shen residence, the tension was palpable. Yakin's smile seemed tighter, her gaze sharper. Chongqing felt the weight of their scrutiny, a constant, suffocating pressure. The results of the DNA test were due any day. The waiting was a torment, each tick of the clock a hammer blow against her fragile composure. The house, once a symbol of her family's legacy, now felt like a battleground, every room a potential trap. She was walking a tightrope, balancing precariously between the truth and the elaborate web of lies that threatened to engulf her. The stakes were higher than she could have imagined, the fight for her family, her identity, and her future had just begun. The night stretched before her, long and filled with shadows, a stark reminder of the battles yet to come. The city lights smeared across the car window, a distorted reflection of the turmoil brewing within Shin Chongqing. Ding Jiehui's saccharine smile from earlier that day lingered, a phantom sweetness now curdling into something bitter. Jiehui's insistence on a fun night out felt less like genuine camaraderie and more like a staged performance. Chongqing's fingers drummed against the plush leather of the car seat, a silent rhythm of suspicion. She glanced at Zhao Yi, her best friend, whose excitement for the evening was palpable. A pang of guilt twisted in Chongqing's stomach. Was she being paranoid? Was she projecting her own anxieties onto Jiehui's seemingly innocent gestures? The car pulled up to a bustling KTV, the pulsating bass of the music a physical tremor against the pavement. The air inside was thick with the scent of stale cigarette smoke and cheap perfume, a heady cocktail that assaulted Chongqing's senses. The flashing lights, the cacophony of voices, the sheer energy of the place, it was overwhelming. Chongqing felt a hand on her arm, Jiehui's touch light but insistent. Come on, Chongqing. Let's get a room. Jiehui's eyes gleamed with an almost feverish excitement, a stark contrast to her usual demure demeanor. Chongqing hesitated. Something about this felt wrong, a discordant note in the orchestrated symphony of the evening. But Zhao Yi was already pulling her forward, her enthusiasm infectious. Inside the private room, the plush velvet seating and the glittering disco ball created an atmosphere of artificial intimacy. Jiehui immediately took charge, ordering drinks and selecting songs, her every move calculated to project an image of effortless grace. Chongqing watched her, a detached observer in a play she hadn't auditioned for. Jiehui's laughter felt forced, her smiles too wide, her gestures too exaggerated. It was as though she was performing for an unseen audience. But who was the audience? And what was the performance? As the night wore on, fueled by alcohol and the pulsating rhythm of the music, Zhao Yi and Jiehui seemed to bond effortlessly. Chongqing, however, remained on the periphery, a silent observer of their growing intimacy. She felt a growing unease, a prickling sensation at the back of her neck, as if she were being watched. She excused herself, stepping out into the dimly lit corridor, the sudden quiet a stark contrast to the raucous energy of the KTV room. She needed a moment to breathe, to gather her thoughts, to dissect the unsettling feeling that had settled in her gut. As she leaned against the cool wall, a flicker of movement caught her eye. At the end of the corridor, partially hidden in the shadows, stood Jiahui. But she wasn't alone. A man's arm was wrapped around her waist, his face buried in her hair. Changqing's breath hitched. It was Zhao Yi's boyfriend. The scene before her was a tableau of betrayal, a stark revelation of Jiahui's duplicity. The carefully constructed facade of innocence crumbled, revealing the cunning manipulator beneath. Changqing's mind raced, piecing together the fragments of Jiahui's behavior, the subtle manipulations, the veiled insults, the calculated moves to isolate her from Zhao Yi. It all clicked into place, a horrifying mosaic of deceit. A wave of nausea washed over her, a physical manifestation of the disgust churning within her. She wanted to confront them, to expose their treachery, but a strange paralysis held her captive. She watched as whispered something in Jiahui's ear, his words inaudible but their intimacy undeniable. Jiahui's laughter, sharp and brittle, echoed in the empty corridor. Then, with a chilling clarity, Changqing heard Jiahui's voice, laced with venom, "Shen Changqing, you humiliated me. I'll let you watch how your best friend becomes my man." The words hung in the air, poison darts aimed directly at Changqing's heart. The humiliation Jiahui referred to was a minor incident, a perceived slight that Changqing had long forgotten. Yet, Jiahui had clung to it, nurturing it, letting it fester into this venomous act of revenge. Changqing's initial paralysis gave way to a surge of cold fury. The betrayal was a double blow, a wound inflicted not only by Jiahui but also by someone she had considered a friend. The world around her seemed to tilt, the corridor swaying precariously. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to regain control. This wasn't just about a stolen boyfriend, this was about something deeper, something darker. Jiahui's actions, her calculated cruelty, hinted at a larger game at play. What was her endgame? And what role did her mother, Ding Yakin, play in this elaborate charade? Changqing's mind raced, connecting the dots, searching for answers in the swirling chaos of her thoughts. She knew, with a chilling certainty, that this was just the beginning. The battle lines had been drawn, and the stakes were higher than she could have imagined. The fight for her family, for her legacy, for her very sanity, had just begun. The biting chill of the late autumn air nipped at Changqing's exposed skin as she stepped out of the chauffeured car. A sprawling, modern building loomed before her, its glass facade reflecting the overcast sky. Elite Martial Arts Academy, the sign proclaimed in bold, stylized letters. Changqing's breath hitched in her throat, a knot of unease tightening in her stomach. Taekwondo. Her father's suggestion, or rather, Ding Yakin's thinly veiled insistence. Self-defense, Yakin had purred, her smile not quite reaching her calculating eyes. For a young lady in your position, it's essential. Changqing's fingers curled into her palms. Essential? Or a subtle way to keep her occupied, to further isolate her within the gilded cage of the Shen estate. The interior of the academy was a stark contrast to its sleek exterior, a vast, open space dominated by the pungent aroma of sweat and the resounding thuds of impact. Men and women, clad in crisp white dobaks, moved with a fluid power that both intimidated and fascinated her. Changqing, still in her designer clothes, felt acutely out of place, a porcelain doll in a room full of coiled springs. A wave of dizziness washed over her, a familiar phantom sensation, a fleeting image of nothing. Her past, a locked vault within her own mind. She clenched her jaw, pushing the disorientation away. She couldn't afford weakness, not now. Not ever. You must be Miss Shen. A gruff voice cut through her thoughts. A man, built like a brick wall, with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite, stood before her. Coach Li, her father had informed her. Ex-military, renowned for his discipline. Ding Yakin's choice, undoubtedly. Chongqing met his gaze, her own expression carefully neutral. Coach Li, she acknowledged, her voice cool and composed. Inside, however, a different battle raged. Fear, a cold serpent, coiled around her heart. But another emotion, a nascent spark of defiance, flickered to life. She wouldn't let them see her fear. She wouldn't let them win. The first lesson was brutal. Not physically, not yet. But the sheer intensity of Coach Li's gaze, the unwavering expectation in his eyes, stripped away any pretense of fragility. He spoke little, his instructions clipped and precise, his demonstrations swift and powerful. Chongqing, clumsy in her borrowed dobok, stumbled through the basic stances, her movements stiff and awkward. Each misstep, each faltering block, felt like a public humiliation. "They're watching me," she thought, her gaze darting to the other students, their faces impassive, their eyes assessing. "They're judging me." Jiehui's words echoed in her mind, a saccharine whisper laced with venom, "You're suffragile, Chongqing. You need to be protected." Protected? Or controlled? Again, Coach Li barked, his voice echoing through the training hall. Chongqing's muscles screamed in protest, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She felt a prickle of tears behind her eyes, a childish response she ruthlessly suppressed. She would not cry. Not here. Not in front of them. She repeated the movement, her focus sharpening, her determination hardening. Each repetition, each correction, chipped away at the veneer of helplessness. As the lesson progressed, a strange shift began to occur within Chongqing. The initial fear, the paralyzing self-consciousness, began to recede, replaced by a raw, untamed energy. She was no longer a porcelain doll, but a piece of clay, being molded, shaped, hardened by the relentless pressure. The pain, the exhaustion, became a perverse source of strength, a tangible proof of her resilience. She was still clumsy, still unsure, but there was a newfound fire in her eyes, a flicker of something dangerous. During a brief respite, Coach Li approached her, his expression unreadable. "In Taekwondo," he said, his voice low and intense, "the key is to learn how to take a beating." His gaze bored into hers, as if searching for something deep within her soul. Chongqing stared back, her heart pounding against her ribs. She understood. It wasn't just about physical blows. It was about enduring the constant barrage of Yakin's manipulations, Jiehui's subtle digs, her father's detached indifference. It was about surviving the psychological warfare that had become her daily life. "I understand," she replied, her voice surprisingly steady. And she did. She understood that she was in a fight for her family, for her sanity, for her very self. And she was finally starting to understand how to fight back. The image of Ding Yakin's smug smile flashed through her mind, followed by Jiehui's condescending gaze. A cold resolve settled within her, a quiet, steely determination. She would learn. She would endure. She would win. The training continued, the rhythmic thuds of feet against mats, the sharp intakes of breath, the gruff commands of Coach Li, all merging into a strange symphony of pain and resilience. And within the heart of the storm, Shen Chongqing, the forgotten heiress, began to remember who she was. Not a victim. Not a pawn. A warrior. The sterile scent of antiseptic hung heavy in the air, a stark contrast to the turbulent emotions churning within Oh Haiyang. He drummed his fingers against the cool, faux leather of the doctor's office chair, the rhythmic tapping a counterpoint to the erratic thump of his own heart. The doctor, a small, bespectacled man with an air of practiced calm, shuffled through some papers, the crisp sound echoing in the otherwise silent room. Each rustle felt like a shard of glass scraping against Oh Haiyang's already frayed nerves. He'd orchestrated this meticulously, each move planned with the precision of a surgeon, and yet doubt, a cold, insidious tendril, began to wrap around his resolve. What if it all went wrong? What if his gamble, his desperate attempt to protect Chongqing, backfired? The weight of responsibility pressed down on him, heavy as the mahogany desk in Chongqing's study. The doctor cleared his throat, breaking the strained silence. The results are unexpected, he began, his voice carefully neutral, and Oh Haiyang's stomach clenched. Unexpected. The word hung in the air, a harbinger of something unwelcome. His carefully constructed plan, his meticulously built house of cards, threatened to collapse. He forced himself to maintain a semblance of calm, his expression carefully schooled into one of polite inquiry. Unexpected? In what way, doctor? The DNA samples don't match. There's no biological connection between the two individuals. The doctor adjusted his glasses, peering at Oh Haiyang over the rims. His gaze was clinical, detached, but Oh Haiyang felt as though he was being dissected, every hidden motive laid bare under that scrutinizing stare. A cold dread washed over him. No biological connection. It couldn't be. He'd been so sure. Ding Yakin, that viper in silk, wouldn't risk such a blatant lie. Would she? The doubt, once a mere tendril, now blossomed into a full-blown vine, choking the breath from his lungs. Are you certain? He managed, his voice a strained whisper, betraying the turmoil raging within. The doctor, oblivious to his inner struggle, simply nodded. Absolutely. There's no room for error in these tests. He pushed the papers across the desk. You can see for yourself. Oh Haiyang reached for the documents, his hand trembling slightly. The black and white of the results blurred before his eyes, the stark scientific jargon swimming in a sea of disbelief. No connection. Ding Jiahui wasn't Pan Weisen's daughter. But if not her, then who? The question hammered against his skull, a relentless pulse of confusion and dawning horror. A sudden, sharp intake of breath from the doorway startled him. He looked up to see Mrs. Rong, her face ashen, clutching a crumpled tissue in her hand. Her eyes, usually so bright and alert, were wide with a mixture of fear and guilt. Mrs. Rong, he began, his voice sharp with a sudden suspicion, what is it? Something in her expression, a flicker of something unsaid, sent a chill down his spine. She stumbled forward, her voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Oh, I made a mistake. Each word was punctuated by a shaky breath, her body trembling as though caught in a sudden winter storm. Oh Haiyang's heart pounded against his ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. A mistake, he repeated, the words laced with a growing dread. He had a sinking feeling he already knew what she was going to say, a premonition of disaster coiling in his gut. The cup, the one I took for the DNA sample, I got the wrong one. Her voice cracked, tears welling in her eyes. She looked at him, her gaze pleading for understanding, for forgiveness. It's not Ding Jiahui's, but mine. The words hung in the air, heavy as lead, each syllable a hammer blow shattering the fragile remnants of his plan. Mine. Mrs. Rong's. The implications were staggering, a tidal wave of realization crashing over him. The DNA sample he'd submitted, the one that supposedly belonged to Ding Jiahui, was actually Mrs. Rong's. And it didn't match Pan Weisen's. Which meant his mind raced, trying to piece together the fragments of this shattered puzzle. If Mrs. Rong's DNA didn't match, and Ding Jiahui's likely wouldn't either, then who was Pan Weisen's child? Who was he trying to bring into the Shen family? He closed his eyes, his head spinning. This changed everything. His meticulously crafted plan, his carefully constructed web of deception, had been built on a foundation of sand. Now, it was collapsing around him, threatening to bury him beneath the weight of its own failure. He opened his eyes, his gaze meeting Mrs. Rong's. Her face was a mask of despair, reflecting his own inner turmoil. He wanted to rage, to scream, to lash out at the cruel twist of fate that had brought them to this point. But he couldn't. He had to think, to find a way to salvage the situation, to protect Chongqing from the fallout of this monumental mistake. He drew a deep breath, forcing himself to regain control. He couldn't afford to panic. He had to think. He had to adapt. The game wasn't over, not yet. It had just become infinitely more complicated. The porcelain teacup trembled in Chongqing's hand, the delicate floral pattern blurring as she stared at the reflection shimmering on its surface. A stranger looked back at her, a woman with eyes that held the weight of forgotten memories, a phantom ache in her chest where a life she couldn't grasp once resided. Ding Yakin's laughter, echoing from the garden below, grated on her nerves like fingernails on a chalkboard. The woman moved with an almost unnatural grace, a performance meticulously crafted to charm and disarm. Chongqing knew better. Beneath that polished veneer lay a viper, its fangs poised, ready to strike. She thinks she's won, Chongqing thought, the grip on her teacup tightening. But the game is far from over. The scent of jasmine tea, usually a comfort, now felt cloying, a suffocating reminder of the gilded cage Yakin was building around her. Chongqing placed the cup on the table, the small click echoing in the quiet room. She needed to move, to act. Passivity was a luxury she could no longer afford. Mrs. Rong, the housekeeper, her face etched with worry lines, entered the room, her gaze flitting towards the open balcony and the laughter drifting up from below. "Miss Chongqing," she began, her voice hushed, "Mr. Pan seems enchanted." The unspoken accusation hung heavy in the air. Chongqing closed her eyes briefly, inhaling deeply. Enchanted. The word tasted bitter, like ash. Her father, a man once so astute, so discerning, was now putty in Yakin's hands. "I know, Mrs. Rong," Chongqing replied, her voice calm despite the turmoil within. "But we won't let her win." Later that evening, Chongqing found Ding Jiehui by the grand piano in the music room, her fingers dancing across the ivory keys. The melody, melancholic and hauntingly familiar, tugged at something deep within Chongqing, a fleeting memory of a similar melody, a different time. She pushed the sensation away, reminding herself to remain vigilant. Jiehui, with her doe-eyed innocence and carefully cultivated air of fragility, was a more insidious threat than her mother. A wolf in sheep's clothing. "Beautiful," Chongqing commented, her voice deliberately neutral. Jiehui's fingers stilled, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes before she turned, a practiced smile gracing her lips. "Thank you, Chongqing. It's a piece my mother taught me." The mention of Yakin tightened the knot in Chongqing's stomach. "Your mother seems to have many talents," Chongqing replied, the subtle edge in her voice not lost on Jiehui. A faint blush crept up Jiehui's cheeks. "She does," she murmured, her gaze drifting towards the window, where the lights of the city twinkled like scattered diamonds. "She's ambitious." The word hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Chongqing watched her, her mind racing. Jiehui's focus seemed to have shifted, her attention no longer solely on gaining Chongqing's trust. There was a new element in her demeanor, a subtle restlessness, a preoccupation that had nothing to do with Chongqing and everything to do with Zhao Yi, the young and ambitious lawyer Chongqing had hired to investigate her father's recent business dealings. A pawn in a larger game? Perhaps. Chongqing filed the observation away, another piece of the puzzle yet to be placed. Over the next few days, Chongqing intensified her own investigation, working closely with Uncle O. The DNA test results were still pending, a looming shadow over their every move. They delved deeper into Yakin's past, uncovering a web of deceit and manipulation that stretched back years. The information was damning, enough to expose Yakin's true nature, but Chongqing needed more. She needed concrete proof, something irrefutable that would shatter Yakin's carefully constructed facade and free her father from her grasp. One evening, During a tense dinner with Yakin and Jiahui, the conversation turned to the future of the Shen family. Yakin, her eyes gleaming with barely concealed triumph, spoke with a casual confidence that set Changqing's teeth on edge. Shen Changqing is now a treasure of the Shen family, she said, her voice smooth as silk, but she may not necessarily be a treasure in the future. The underlying threat was unmistakable. Changqing met her gaze, her own expression unreadable. The future is uncertain for all of us, wouldn't you agree? She replied, her voice calm but laced with steel. Jiahui, unusually quiet throughout the dinner, shot a quick, nervous glance at her mother. The air crackled with unspoken tension. Later, in the privacy of her room, Changqing replayed Yakin's words, dissecting their meaning. The DNA test. It was the key. Yakin's confidence stemmed from the belief that the results would swing in her favor, solidifying her position within the family. But what if they didn't? What if the truth was different from what Yakin anticipated? The thought sent a shiver of anticipation down Changqing's spine. Meanwhile, in Yakin's lavishly decorated guest suite, a different kind of conversation unfolded. Are you sure about this? Jiahui asked, her voice laced with a hint of anxiety. Yakin, her face illuminated by the soft glow of a bedside lamp, smiled, a predatory gleam in her eyes. Absolutely, she replied, her voice dripping with confidence. When the DNA test result is out, there will be nothing they can do. Jiahui remained silent, her gaze fixed on the intricate pattern of the carpet, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. She had her own game to play, her own secrets to protect. The fate of the Shen family, the truth about Changqing's past, all hung precariously in the balance, a fragile web of lies and hidden agendas waiting to unravel. The standoff had begun, and the stakes were higher than ever before.